This week on the Destination Angler.
My wife had a really nice fish on and it jumped out of the water. It was a beautiful rainbow, so we could see it was about 15 inches. And this bull trout came in and just got it sideways in his mouth and took it off her line and swam away.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by J.P. Ross Fly Rods, makers of happiness, one rod at a time. Get outside and simply fish. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout water so you spend less time on the road and more time fishing. Coming up on the Destination Angler, we have a very special guest, Tom Rosenbauer of the Orvis Company, who dials us in to the amazing brook trout fishing in his home state of Vermont. And after that, we explore Michigan's Two-Hearted River in the wild and remote Upper Peninsula. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode on Shenandoah National Park with 60-year fly fishing veteran Harry Murray. You won't want to miss these episodes. And if you like the show, please give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. That'd be much appreciated, and thank you for listening. Today, our destination is the world-famous Metolius River in Central Oregon, and our guest is expert fly angler, fly tyer, and blogger John Kreft with Riverkeeper Flies. The Metolius is considered one of the most challenging streams in the West. Designated a wild and scenic river, it winds its way through the Deschutes National Forrest, where prolific hatches and wary trout await the venturing angler. And it's a spring creek with healthy populations of rainbows and, get this, bull trout. But unlike most bull trout rivers in the lower 48, here it's perfectly legal to target these bad boys. You know, John moved from Sisters, Oregon with his wife of 32 years to be close to his favorite river, the Metolius, which he's been fishing now for over 50 years. Man, let me tell you, he's living the dream, fishing 130 days plus a year and writing weekly about his fly fishing adventures and innovative fly patterns on his website, Riverkeeper Flies, where he's cataloged over 200 fly patterns. Check it out. John was featured in American Fly Fishing Magazine last year and is a frequent speaker and celebrity tyer at shows and clubs throughout the Northwest. And lucky for us, John is here to give us the lowdown on the Metolius from top to bottom while sharing some of his favorite fly patterns and stories from his adventures in the West. So dig out your 6X tippet and dust off your A game as we dive into the Metolius River, Oregon style. Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my passion on my favorite home waters, the Metolius River.
Yeah, fantastic. So I got to ask you, it's the middle of winter. It's January when we're recording. What's an avid fly fisherman like you doing in the middle of winter? Are you tying some flies?
I focus on my fly tying. I'm a custom fly tyer, so I do have a few orders that I fill, but the winter time is when I fill what my wife calls the provider box. And those are bins of fly boxes that she goes through and I go through on when we fish the Metolius River and all the other rivers in our fly fishing road trips that we get to go on.
Oh, nice.
In addition, I sneak out and fish on the Metolius in the wintertime. It's a river that I fish 4 months out of the year. But I don't go out quite as often. In fact, I was out a couple of days ago and doing something that I normally don't do, and that's nymph fish.
Oh, man.
So in order to catch trout in the wintertime, you've got to go subsurface a lot. So that's when I start using some of the flies, actually some of the Perdigons, and I'll go over some of those later in the show.
Yeah, because you like dry fly fishing. That's your thing, isn't it?
You know, I've been fly fishing for 50 years, and I'm fortunate enough. I'm retired, and we live in Sisters for a reason, and that's the proximity of the Metolius River. And I can go over there from my house. I can be fishing in 25, 30 minutes. And so years ago, when I didn't live in Sisters, We lived in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, which was about 100 miles from Metolius, and up over the Cascade Range into eastern Oregon. And we would fish a day, maybe two. And so if I wanted to fish and catch fish, I did whatever I needed to. But I have a luxury now that if I want to fish, I fish. If not, go home, have a cup of coffee, maybe tie a fly or two, and go back the following day.
Sounds pretty nice. And you're retired, correct?
I am,
Okay.
but I think I'm busier now than when I was working. You hear that from people, but
You do. You hear that all the time.
yeah, my wife and I, she's a little bit younger than I am, but we focus full time these days on fly fishing. We've been blessed that we're able to do that, and both fly fishing and volunteering on different causes, but they're all basically related to fly fishing.
That's fantastic. Well, let's zoom out for a minute and let's talk about Central Oregon. I mean, what a fly fisher's mecca. I mean, I can think of probably a dozen rivers out your way that I'd love to fish someday. But like, how would you describe, the overall fishing opportunities in your part of the world?
The Central Oregon, it has so many blue ribbon fly fishing waters. Besides the Metolius, it flows into Lake Billy Chinook along with two other rivers, the Deschutes River, the upper Deschutes, and the Crooked River. And both those rivers in their own right hold some beautiful fish and have a terrific fishing opportunity for them. Below the Pelton Dam, which holds back Lake Billy Chinook, is the lower Deschutes. And it has got a spectacular trout fishery. And in many years, steelhead and salmon go up that to spawn. This last year, there was a poor steelhead season, so they actually canceled it. But it's an opportunity many years to be able to hook some really nice steelhead.
Nice.
Now, the lower Deschutes flows into the Columbia, which eventually goes into the Pacific Ocean. So that's what the watershed drains. The other major river is Fall River, which is south of Bend, and it flows into the upper Deschutes. Besides that, we've got a lot of lake fishing and Century Drive. There's Osmer Lake, Crane Prairie, East Lake on the other side of the highway up in the Caldera, and Paulina Lake. And so there's just a ton of great opportunities for any fly fisher. And it's a variety of water. We'll talk about the Metolius in a moment, but some of those waters are just walk and wade. Other waters, it's best fish from a boat. Even some of the lakes at certain times of the year, you can fish it effectively from the shore. But
okay,
I was going to try to add up all of the fly shops that are in the region just to give you a sense. But we've got a local one here in Sisters, the Fly Fisher's Place. The owner is Jeff Perrin, and you've had him on the show before. But there's probably 3 or 4 in Bend, which is about 25 miles east of Sisters. And then as you go north, there's Fin and Fire in Redmond. And once you get closer to the Deschutes River, there's another couple up there. And then farther south, Sun River Resort, there's a couple of fly shops there, which would be on the way to the Fall River and the lakes that I mentioned.
Oh, that's great.
It's just a terrific opportunity for anybody. So if you've got a family, this is a great place to recreate. There's tons of hiking, mountain biking. There's skiing in the wintertime. We've got some championship golf courses, I think, too. But I say that you really can't be a serious golfer and fly fisherman. You've got to concentrate on one.
I agree. Can you wade Fall River and Crooked Creek?
Fall River and Crooked River, yes.
Crooked River, yeah.
Yes, okay. Both of those. Although I think Jeff used to guide the Fall River, certain sections of it, but most of that on the upper river is wadable, very easy, not fairly shallow, most of it. And then the Fall River comes. No, actually, he didn't fish. He floated the upper Deschutes.
Okay.
But that fishery has been in decline up there on the Deschutes. But the Fall River is stocked. They put some really big breed trout in that, and it's a great opportunity. But it's crystal clear, and it's a tough fishery.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a great opportunity in Central Oregon for anybody.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Tons and tons of options, right?
Yep.
So when I first called you to ask you about doing a show on Metolius, your first answer was, "Oh, there's no fish in the Metolius."
That's right.
And then I think you you came around and said, "Okay, we can do a show."
I think the very next sentence was, "Tell everyone you know."
Yeah, something like that, right? So here we are on a podcast, and I guess
I know.
and then you said that it's your favorite river. You even moved to Sisters so you could be closer to it. So I'm kind of curious, why is it your favorite river? What is it about the Metolius?
It's just a magical place. And let me describe what it's like. This is a river that's only about 28 miles long. As I said, it flows into Lake Village Chinook. The upper river is fly fishing only, catch and release. That's for the first 11 or 12 miles. But it's right on the rain shadow of the Cascades. And so the Cascades block most of the rain coming over, and you can be in a downpour as you're coming over the pass, but you get on the other side of the river.
Yeah.
And those clouds have lifted. And so you don't have a ton of rain, and that starts into the Central Oregon, not quite desert, but there's old growth ponderosa pines up and down the river. The river is in Deschutes National Forest. There are a few areas that are private property, but in most cases, you can walk up and down both sides of the river.
Oh, great.
We get a lot of hikers that come to the river just for the views. There's a beautiful view right at the bridge of the hatchery that you probably have in some of the info that I've sent to you that is just magical. But the other thing is that my wife and I have been fortunate to fish a lot of places, and many of those rivers have a major highway running next to them.
Right.
Or a train track running along them. And there's nothing like that here. So it's just nature, and it just kind of kicks back. A lot of families go there to camp. There's 10 campgrounds along the river, up and down the river. And I should highlight this, there's no guiding on the river.
Oh, really? Say more about that.
Which is pretty phenomenal. It was, and I don't know when that came into effect, but in 1988, the river was designated as Wild and Scenic River. And I don't know that it's ever been guided, but that's just a different feel then. So for the people that are new to the area, certainly that's one of the negatives, because you've got to go out there by yourself and try to figure it out. But that's
right.
What I enjoy, is trying to figure it out.
So why would they not allow guides on the Metolius?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. I mean, I've never heard of that.
I could certainly guess. I could have some theories, but they would just be thoughts coming from me, and I really don't know if they're accurate or not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's super interesting.
But it is a river that at times is quite busy, and other times you won't see very many people. And so if we had guides on the river, that's a potential for more people. But
yeah, commercial.
There's guides all over the river. I mean, in different rivers. So
right.
Hi everybody, this is JP from JP Ross Fly Rods. We're happy to support Steve and sponsor the Destination Angler podcast. Do us a favor and check us out on our website, smallstreamflyfishing.com. JP Ross Fly Rods and Company has been around since 1997. We've made thousands of fly rods with one purpose: helping you get outside and be happy. So check out our line of small stream fly rods like our Muir 7-foot 5-piece 3-weight E-glass, our famous Beaver Meadow series of rods starting at 5-foot 2-weight, and don't forget our 6.5-foot 3-weight 4-piece, and now our new Beaver Meadow S-glass 6.5, 2-weight, 3-weight, all the way up to 8-foot 5-weight all in 4-piece. Check us out, please, at smallstreamflyfishing.com. And thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you on the water.
So I was in Colorado last summer and came across this really incredible app called Trout Routes. You know, if you've ever looked for a good map to help you with anything from public access to finding the best trout streams in a given area, I highly recommend checking out Trout Routes. Trout Routes has mapped out every stream by state with very detailed access maps for every stream, and they have over 15 different map layers with hundreds of thousands of access points. They also have local fly shops, the ability to take notes, and even local stream regulations, and you can download maps for offline use. Today, Trout Routes covers 23 states, including Montana, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, West Virginia, and more. And they will be adding 10 more states this year, including states like Utah and New York. So if you have an upcoming trip or looking to explore nearby streams, I suggest you check out Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Don't leave home without it. Well, you started to talk about the upper section being catch and release. Can you kind of walk us through the profile of the river and also the profile, like how does a fish profile change as you're coming downstream?
Yeah, so this is a unique river. They call it a spring creek, and it starts at the base of Black Butte, and the river just comes out of this side of a mountain, and it's not like it rushes out; it just starts. And then there's a large area, and this is on a section of private property that I think it's called the Metolius Springs, and the water just comes out of the ground. And that's the start of the Metolius. As it flows downstream about 1.5 to 2.5 miles, you'll come across this little community called Camp Sherman. And there's a Camp Sherman store there. There's a small school and a few areas of private property in there that people have homes. In addition, there's cabins along the river that people have, I believe they're 99-year Forest Service leases that they built their cabins. Okay. And they're close to the river, but you can walk right in front of their house on a Forest Service trail and not be impinging on their access or dam.
Right.
But this is easily waded in most sections. There's some that are deeper, but in some of those sections, you can easily walk across the river and not be any deeper than your thigh. Huh. The river is, when it comes out of the ground, it's about 45, 48 degrees. And so that provides a constant temperature year round for the river. What's unique about this river, though, is that there's creeks that come into it from the west side. And one comes from Settle Lake. It's called Lake Creek. And then there's other creeks that flow in from the Mount Jefferson wilderness area. And that's more of a freestone than when we get moisture or when we get some snow and then all of a sudden it melts, it will increase the size of the river. But generally, it stays pretty constant year round. It'll fluctuate somewhat.
Nice. So you don't get like a big spring runoff? It doesn't get all blown out in the spring?
Usually not, but occasionally we will. It just depends on the snowpack and how fast things melt.
Okay.
But the river will increase in temperature. We've recorded it up to 55, 58 degrees, but that's not a place where you'll see hoot owl hours associated with that. It's just that the water is cold enough. And we see people wading wet, but oh my gosh. In fact, several years ago, cold. we would wade wet when we were on one of our road trips in Montana, and it was 190 to 100 degrees out when we came home. And we waded wet, and your legs get blue in about 5 minutes. It's just so cold. But back to the river, the first few miles of the upper river, I would call it's about 4 or 5 miles. So it's from headwaters down to one of the many Forest Service campgrounds called Gorge Campground. And that's an area that actually I'm concentrating on now in the wintertime. I was out just 2 days ago in that section. and hooked a few fish, mostly whitefish, but a couple of rainbows. But
Nice.
and so that's, as I mentioned, there's campgrounds right along the river there, and you can easily gain access to it. At that point, there's some private property on the west side and a little bit on the east right there. It's called House on the Metolius, and that's a place you can stay, and you can give them a call, rent a cabin, rent a room,
Oh,
and they've got some private property that the river runs right through them, and it's only about a mile access or so. And then below that is about where Canyon Creek comes in, and that starts what I would call the middle river. And the river changes structure a lot, and it goes through a canyon, and there's actually, I would call it class 2, class 3 water. And that's kind of unique for a spring creek, really, I think.
yeah.
And that's something you would not wade. You'll see kayaks occasionally, and it's going down the river, but there's just some places. I've run class 4 rapids on the Deschutes River in a drift boat, but I wouldn't go in that. It's just pretty fast. And I should talk about the gradient. On the upper river, it doesn't flow super fast. And then when it gets into the canyon, the gradient increases, and then it will open up into some pools, which are some great spots. And there's another set of springs right there in the canyon called Gushing Springs. And a ton of water comes into that. And it's just a beautiful blue hole. Which actually I think is the most magical spot on the river itself.
Neat.
It opens up then at that spot, going through the canyon. The river slows down to some extent and ends up at the Wizard Falls Fish Hatchery, and it has that's actually my favorite image that I sent to you. Looking upstream, and it's just a volcanic crack in the ground, lava tubes that have opened up evidently, and the water just rushes through that. And it's just a blue color that many people come
Right.
to the river just to view that.
I saw that picture.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous there, and especially in the fall time too. So the leaves along the river, it's just spectacular. So the fish hatchery is actually a great place to go look at some huge fish that they have in there. But
Okay.
I don't know that I mentioned it, but they don't stock this river. They stopped stocking it in, I believe it was 1996. Prior to that, they used to put rainbow in the river. But I'll tell you, it fishes better now than when they stocked it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's continue down the river. You can get access on both sides of the river. There's some great holes in there. I fish that all the time. And then from there down about 3 miles is the end of the fly fishing only section. And it ends at Bridge 99, or Lower Bridge as it's called. And the road ends going downstream. It'll go back up the mountain and into some Forest Service roads, but that's as far north as you can get on the river. The rest of the river is what I would call the lower river. And there has been more water coming in, and so the character of the river changes a lot, and there's no way that you could wade across the river.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so there's just so much more water. And about below the bridge, somewhere a mile or so on the west side, it starts to become bordered by the Warren Springs Indian Reservation. And that goes all the way down to Lake Billy Chinook, and the access on the west side is restricted, so you can't get on the river there.
John, what are the stream access laws? And if you don't mind me asking, what are the stream access laws? So if I'm in the river, am I trespassing even though I'm next to that Indian reservation?
Well, you wouldn't. There's no way you could actually wade that section. It's just too deep.
Oh, okay.
So it's actually a moot point because there's no way you could get to it.
Couldn't do it.
Yeah. But there's some good fishing down there, but the gradient increases dramatically, and the holes are far and few between because of the speed of the river. And so most fly fishers I know, they'll walk down below the bridge about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles, but that's about it. There are, you can legally fish with a spinning rod, but no bait. And even then, you're supposed to return all the fish to the river.
Gotcha. Well, that's a great overview. Let me ask you this. Everything I read about the Metolius is that it's a super technical, challenging river. Do you think it deserves that reputation?
I do. People say you have to have a PhD to hook a fish on the river.
Ha.
And there are times when I believe that.
Yeah.
We have had people that we meet on the river. We're there a lot, so we meet people, and but we'll have some folks we met. There was a lady on the river. She said she'd been going to the Metolius for 30 years and never hooked fish.
Wonder why she keeps coming back.
You're doing something wrong, but
Yeah, I mean,
and then there's
ugh.
and I've done presentations to fly clubs around Oregon and one in Washington. And there's fly
Yeah.
clubs that come to the river to do an outing, which is great. And they won't see a fish, or very few of their members will hook something. And that's all dependent upon, I believe, the time of year and the strategies you use to catch fish. But the water is very, very clear. There's not a lot of fish per mile, as many as some of the rivers I fish in Idaho and Montana. I was trying to come up with a count, but I couldn't find anything before our session today. But there's some beautiful fish in that river, but they are wily, and you've got to put in your time. And I'll share some of my tips a little bit later about strategies we use to try to hook some fish. But it is true.
Yeah.
Depending upon the time of year, you will never see a fish. And
No kidding.
you come back the next day or 2 days from then, there might be a great hatch and not a fish rising. And then you'll be there another day and there'll be a sporadic hatch or a mediocre hatch, and you'll see a few fish rising. Why? I have no clue. But that's what keeps me going back to the river, because I would characterize myself, I'm not an expert on the Metolius. I'm an expert on what I know, and I'm the first to recognize that I don't know a lot.
Oh, you're probably being humble. I got a feeling you probably know quite a bit. But I've also read that it is pretty much a veritable bug factory. And I'm wondering if, some of the challenges that there's so many different types of bugs on the water at the same time.
It's right on. One of the secrets I share with people, and I don't think it's a secret that I know, it's just a practice that my wife Karen and I do. We go to eddies and look in the eddies and the foam line and along the edges and see what insects we can find.
Yeah.
And I have an image of her that she just put her hand in the water and lifted it up, and there were probably 8 different types of bugs in her hand.
Yeah, interesting.
And the fish are rising. And what do you think they're eating? I have no clue. It's, I think, one of those. And sometimes they key in on one bug. Other times they are opportunistic and they'll eat anything that goes by.
Right.
And there's times when, actually, my blog post for this week was something about my obsession with green drakes and the green drake hatch. But I've seen live bugs floating downstream and watch a fish rise to eat it, and they'll turn at the last minute and not eat it.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, I reel in my line and I say, there's no sense of me fishing because they're not even eating real bugs. Why would they eat my fly?
Yeah.
But your question earlier was right on, that it is a prolific hatch. And there's PMDs and there are blue wings and there's a olive mayfly called a Scenic, and there's drakes and clouds and There's olive mayflies from size 16 to 8 throughout the year. And then there's blue, as I mentioned, blue wing olives. There's a few mahoganies, but that's not a hatch that I key on. There's tons of different stoneflies. There's actually little winter stones out there right now. There'll be salmon flies, golden stone. There are, actually, we call them 1 inch long and green. And then there's some size 14s and 12s. So just olive stones all over the place. And I've not even started to talk about caddis.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh.
So combined with the variety of bugs, and then what stages of bug, and then are they choosing to eat that day or not? That's what drives you crazy.
In like a lot of spring creeks, are you dealing with microcurrents as well?
Absolutely. And which is the other strategy that I wanted to share, is a drag-free drift is super important here. And so having a leader system that allows you to do that. But there are all those microcurrents, just like you talked about. And when I give presentations, I talk about casting to windows. I have a blog post about this, but it's really when it's like you open a window in your house and everything is right there for a moment. And so the analogy I use, there's a shiny window in the water and then it just closes because all those microcurrents are starting to affect that. But then all of a sudden it opens again. And if you can put your fly in that window, you'll have a longer drag-free drift and I believe, a higher opportunity to hook a fish.
When you say the window, do you mean like a slick spot on the water where the microcurrents aren't so problematic?
That's exactly right. That's exactly how to describe it.
And that's what you're looking for. So not only are you trying to find a feeding fish, I suppose, but you're also waiting for a window to open by one of those feeding fish.
Yep.
Well, there you go, folks.
And I call it managing expectations too. There's some spots where your fish, where a long drift will actually be 3 feet because of all those microcurrents.
Wow.
In other sections of the river, you might go for 20, 30, 50 feet. You can have a technique with your casting and line management where you can get a super long drift as long as you are managing your line effectively, and you'll have a higher opportunity to catch fish.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a show on the Litort last year, and I kind of billed it as the hardest stream in the east, and I wonder if the Metolius is the hardest stream in the west. It's kind of sounding like it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the tougher ones I've ever fished.
Like one of them, maybe.
Yeah, it can be very rewarding, and there's times where you can catch a multitude of fish. But just to manage expectations, catching 2 and 3 fish a day would be a good day sometimes. I've managed some days I've got double digits, but that's the exception rather than the rule.
That's a great day. Let's talk about fish for a minute. I'd love to. So you've got rainbows and you've got these bull trout and I thought it was super interesting. You know, I was kind of reading up on bull trout that years ago, people used to catch them and kill them. They wanted them out of there. And so now it's kind of like wolves, you know, let's get rid of them all. Yeah. And, you know, obviously the perceptions have changed on bull trout now.
Well, we have rainbow, which are native to the river, and there are a few brown trout in the river, but they're not prevalent. Most of the brown trout that I've seen or heard of are in the upper river around the headwaters down to Gorge Campground. And I've hooked brownies in the 14 to 16 inch range up there. I heard rumors that there was a 20 incher a few years ago, but I've never seen anything close to that. And then there's mountain whitefish all over the river, and that's what I caught mostly a couple of days ago.
Okay.
And they will rise to a dry fly. And the other 2 fish that are in the river now they've tried to reintroduce them are Chinook salmon and kokanee salmon.
Oh, cool.
And that's really where the name Metolius comes from. It was a white salmon. So it used to be that prior to the dam, Pelton Dam, that salmon both kokanee and Chinook would be in the river and spawn, and there was a ton of them from what I understand. And
Yeah.
some of the projects that my wife and I have been involved with, was the Metolius Stewardship Project, where we help plants along the river. It was like many rivers, abused, and some of the streamside vegetation was gone, and so people would walk on it and start silting some of the river. And so the Forest Service several years ago had a project with Trout Unlimited, where volunteers came in and helped plant vegetation along the river. And in addition, the Forest Service created some spots, access points, which we assisted with to say, here's access and egress to get into the river. And they actually put some large rocks for people to walk down, kind of steps, and then access into the river. And that made a tremendous difference in one of the holes, the major hole called the Dolly Hole, which is really bull trout, but they named it before there was a scientific discovery that they were separate species. But just having several entrance points into the river, people would use those instead of just jumping over the side. And in 1 year, we saw a tremendous amount of change with that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I have a post about that and a link to a YouTube video that somebody had made for Trout Unlimited. And if you get into my website and just put Metolius Stewardship Project in the search button at the top, it should pop up for you.
You can take a peek at that. Okay. Well, now, would you say that you're a bull trout fisherman? Do you go after those fish from time to time?
Occasionally. I don't do as much as I used to, and I don't know why. Actually, when I went to the river 2 days ago, I took an 8-weight rod and a couple of streamers to try out again, and I never got it out. So I don't know why, but we see just as many bull trout as we're landing our fish.
Oh yeah, like chasing your your trout.
Exactly. So we have been known to kick at bull trout as we're trying to land rainbows in our nets.
Like, get away from my fish.
Yeah. And they are just very aggressive. In fact, I've hooked bull trout before, and other bull trout chase that bull trout that you have hooked. And there's no way they would be able to eat them, but they're amazing fish. But when I first started bull trout fishing several years ago, fortunate to hook them. And I use streamers and nymphs as well. So they'll take us, you can hook bull trout on size 16 and 18 nymphs. You may not land them, but you could hook them. And then streamers. My favorite streamer is a Dalai Lama that I tie up in olive and white. And that catches a ton of bull trout when I try to go for bull trout.
Okay.
But if you're fishing, actually the one of the first times I had a whitefish that I had hooked nymph fishing, and I was playing it, and all of a sudden it swam into the brush, and I couldn't stop it. And I looked back, and here was a bull trout chasing it.
Oh,
and
man.
Then other times, my wife had a really nice fish on, and it jumped out of the water. It was a beautiful rainbow, so we could see it was about 15 inches. And this bull trout came in and just got it sideways in his mouth and took it off her line and swam away.
Really?
So these bull trout, many of them that I've hooked and landed are, I don't know pound wise, I'm not a pound guy, but they'll be 20 to 26 inches, and they'll go up to, some of them are approaching 30, 36 inches.
Big fish.
I had one fish that in one hole, I hooked and landed 3 bull trout in half an hour many years ago. And the biggest one, I could have stuck my fist in his mouth.
Oh my gosh. That's a good day.
And so there are 2 types of bull trout in the river. The resident ones that live there year round, and most of the big ones come up to spawn out of Lake Billy Chinook. So they're down in Lake Billy Chinook with the kokanee salmon that are swimming around. That and I said kokanee salmon earlier. I meant sockeye salmon.
Okay.
So sockeye go to the ocean and come back. These kokanees go down to Lake Billy Chinook, spend their time down there, and then they come back into the river and spawn. And they're not huge. A 14-inch kokanee would be a big one.
Okay.
But the bull trout target them down in the lake, and then they come up and they'll eat anything then.
Yeah.
But we've been actually at Canyon Creek that I mentioned is one of the creeks that come in. It's a cold, clear creek, and many bull trout go up there and spawn. And actually, fishing is restricted in that you can't fish at any time out of the year. But right in the hole, we saw a bunch of fish staging, and my wife counted over 100 bull trout one year.
Oh, no kidding. When you catch rainbows from time to time, are they, scarred up from, escaping from bull trout?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Maybe that's why your fish counts are low. You got bull trout eating all the rainbows.
Exactly.
A little bit. Well, let me ask you this. Switching gears a little bit, I was on your website and I was reading a little bit about how you got your start in fly fishing, and you said that I was mesmerized by the beauty of fly casting, and I was hoping you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was in high school fishing on the North Santiam, little North Fork of the North Santiam. My girlfriend at the time, her sister's boyfriend, fly fished. And that's the first time I'd ever seen anybody fly fish. And he was casting, and I saw that and I go, oh, and I spin fished and used bait. And I was trying to catch fish mostly at that time, probably spin fishing, but it just intrigued me. And it's been a lifelong passion ever since.
Yeah. Did you have some other influences?
No, on fly fishing, no. For some reason, that just, he happened to fish, and I fished up there, and that was about the time that I probably got my driver's license, so I had a little bit of freedom and no money, and just trying to figure out how to get a fly rod. And I ended up, that was about just a very short period of time after that, I probably went to the Metolius for the first time, and I had purchased some flies, and I was casting them and lost a couple in the trees. And I go, oh man, this is going to be an expensive sport if I can't learn to tie my own. Well, little did I know that was probably the worst decision, because I probably spent more on fly tying materials now than I would have flies over the years, but much more enjoyable.
There's two ways to get flies, and they both cost the same, right? You can tie them yourself, or you can buy them from the store, and they cost the same either way. I'm convinced.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that's how I started fly fishing. And I just kind of, when I was in college, I think I did a little bit of spin fishing up in some of the mountains on the coastal range, but I would always go back to fly fishing. And back in those days, I did some salmon and steelhead fishing on the coastal rivers and using a lot of bait at that time. And so I didn't really fly fish for them at that point. But
okay, are you from Oregon?
I am. I'm a native. As is my wife. So yeah.
Oh, very good. Where'd you meet your wife?
At work.
Okay,
many years ago. Yep.
How about that? And she's quite an angler herself.
She was a fisher person, but didn't fly fish. And we used to go to the Metolius, and she'd take a book and she would say, well, if you're not catching fish, there's no way that I would even get a chance. And well, that's changed over the years. I follow her around, and she
is that right?
The fish, actually, between the two of us, she's got the biggest fish on the river. Hers was a 23.5 rainbow on a dry fly.
Wow. Oh, that'd be fun.
The second biggest fish I've ever seen on the river. The first one was a 26.5 inch that I helped a guy land. It was on 6X tippet, and I think an Adams fly. And for some reason, I had a net. He didn't have one. And we tried to get it in the net and it was too big. So I tailed it like a steelhead and we measured it. And I can't remember if I had a tape or I marked a net and then measured it later, and it was 26.5 inches.
That's a great fish. How'd it fight? Good fighter?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, let me talk about fish size for a minute. So actually, I think the last few years, my experience, the size of the fish have gone down a little bit, and I don't know why that's the case. But there are not a lot of 20-inch fish in the river. Mm-hmm. And there'll be people who say that they've caught 20-inch fish, and maybe they have, but if they take a tape measure, I don't know that they are. But they're beautiful, fat fish that fight hard. And a good fish in the river is between 16 and 18.
It's a nice fish. Yeah. Take those all day.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your website, Riverkeeper Flies. And boy, what a great resource. I feel like this is just a gift to all the anglers and fly tyers out there, because when I first came across it, I thought, well, there's got to be a catch here. Like, he's got to be trying to sell something. And you're not, are you? It's blogging. It's just really a gift.
Actually, my wife encouraged me to start my website, and it was back in 2014. She had taken a class to learn about business on the internet, and she was going to look at something for herself, and she said, "Oh, you might enjoy this." And well, I've gone full in. So March 2014 is when I started, and my goal was just to share, and there was not a purpose, there was not a strategy, other than it was a great place to store all of my fly tying pattern sheets. And I had to come up with a way that I could find them. But if I put them on a computer, I had scraps of paper, but then I started to put them into Word documents and I couldn't find them on my computer. And so I've organized it in such a way that it's for fly tyers and non-fly tyers. So if you look at the fly patterns on the top of the menu, it actually will take you to the types of flies. So mayflies, caddis, stoneflies. And in some cases, I have images of real insects, so you can see what they are. And then if you're a fly tyer, there's tying instructions. I've just started in the last year to make YouTube videos. And if you go out to YouTube and look at Riverkeeper Flies, I just actually posted one yesterday for green drake. It's just a way to share. And like you said, there's no catch in it.
Yeah.
I just changed it dramatically a year ago. And so you get the look and feel of what I have. So if you go on my home page, it's the blogs to begin with. So it's the latest 3 blogs, and then you'll see some images because I take a lot of pictures along the river. I've got an Olympus TG6 waterproof camera that I'll stick underwater occasionally to capture a fish. And so
great photography.
Thank you. It's a way that I can tell a story through pictures and document things. So I've got popular posts and over 200 fly pattern sheets on my river. I'm on my website. Resources for the fly tyers. I've got a hook conversion chart, which is super well received, and a bead conversion table. And then other resources. I don't know why I started this page. It's just, it came to me that I have a link to free old fly fishing and fly tying books. So the copyrights have gone off of these, and they're downloadable copies that you can get and read. In fact, the Throwback Thursday fly, that's a weekly post that I have, and it was a T.E. Pritz water cricket, I think it was called, that I tied up and told a short story about. So that came from a book in the late 1800s.
Yeah, that's great. Huh. Have you tried it yet?
No, I haven't. I just tied up one and it's sitting on my bench right here. But the other one that's really important, I think, is the fly fishing road trip.
Right.
So my wife and I have, well, that's about the rest of my website. But I'll pause with that for a second. But it's just a way to talk about strategies that work for me. There's beginning anglers, and I write blog posts about how to help people understand what gear I use. The leader system I use, I think, is important.
Okay.
And I talk about all of those in there. And here's a basic fly box that might help you. Or if you're going to Montana, here's some flies that work for me.
Oh, that's great.
But the fly fishing road trips is morphed into a documentary of where we've been and what's been successful for us. So I talk about the places we've been in Idaho, which let me think. I've got 7 rivers in Idaho, and I've talked about 26 places or 16 different fisheries in Montana.
Yeah.
Some in
a lot of
Oregon.
the Madison, I noticed.
A lot on the Madison. Madison is one of our favorite rivers.
Mm-hmm.
Where we go back because of a reason, and it's which would beg the question: if you live along in Central Oregon, why are you traveling?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. You must like variety.
Well, the answer is we do like variety. We like going to new places, but then when we have a favorite spot, we go back to it.
Yeah.
But I would say that August is the worst month on the Metolius, I think. I call it the dog days of summer.
Okay.
And so we're other places fishing them.
I got you.
And the other major area would be Yellowstone National Park, which we love. So we've been fortunate to go there multiple times, and I talk about that as well. But it's a great resource. It talks about where we stay, where we fish, the effective flies.
Okay.
There's some fish pictures there too, but it's just, and when I start to look at the future for this coming summer, where are we going to go? I'll go back and read those myself and say, where do we want to go back?
Okay.
But it's just a resource, and I do tag flies for people, but it's not a major reason why I do it. It's just something I enjoy doing.
Right. Do you feel like you're can you knock off a fly pretty quickly?
Yeah, I can. And the more I tie, the better I become. And the flies I used to tie years ago, I would laugh at now, but I'm known for tying just about anything. And in fact, I wrote a post about this the other day. The diversity I was tying, which I didn't, this was a fly new to me in the last year, but it's a 2-aught saltwater fly, an EP fiber fly for Baja, that a customer was going down there catching rooster fish and dorado, and I mean, just big fish. And he had given a couple to a friend of his, and evidently they worked well because his friend contacted me and wanted some. So I tied up some 2-aughts, and then I finished those and went immediately to a size 18 blue wing olive because I was finishing an order for a customer. Okay. And then I tied a double bunny, Scott Sanchez.
Yeah, Scott Sanchez. I just did a show with Scott.
Yeah.
Double bunny.
So I tied one of those and featured it as a Throwback Thursday fly.
There you go.
Talked about the history.
Yeah. John, how long does it take you to knock off a blue wing olive?
Depending on the fly, 3 minutes or...
3 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, a little longer. Kind of depends.
That's pretty quick.
The more I tie, the simpler flies I like, but they've got to be tied well. And so the proportions are important to me. And that means if you're trying to tie a 16 or an 18 blue wing olive, if you look at the real fly, and you can go to my website to see pictures of real flies, their bodies are super skinny. And so why would you put a whole bunch of dubbing on it? Because that isn't what the fish are looking for. So if you're trying to select an effective fly, you look at the size first, then the profile of the fly you're going to use to imitate it, and then lastly, color. And I'll go back, this will go directly back to the Metolius. What I think is best for those to hook a fish on the Metolius is a cripple or an emerger pattern.
I was going to ask you about that because you've got a whole bunch of stuck in the shuck midge and I don't know, a couple other patterns that are kind of cripples. So, say more about that.
Actually, my top two flies would be a sparkle dun, and because it's got a shuck to it, and I'll fish that in a size 8 for a green drake and a size 22 for a blue wing olive, and everything in between.
There you go.
So it's the same fly, but just different colors and different proportions. The other one is a fly that my wife and I developed. We call it the Riverkeeper soft ackle cripple. And I've got an image that I sent to you of a real bug on that fly. And if you look at the profile.
Oh, I saw that.
It looks exactly like it. And so what it's trying to imitate is a fish that wings are caught in the water surface. And if you look at those, many of them in an eddy, their wings are laying flat along on top of the water. And so that's what that's trying to emulate.
Oh, it's a neat looking pattern.
And so a cripple and emerger patterns, I think, are much more effective.
Yeah. These fish are looking for an easy meal, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Metolius and some of your techniques, your approaches, and your strategies. So I don't know where to begin on that, but I'm kind of curious, when you first approach the river, what's your thought process when you're walking up to the river? I'm assuming you're doing some observation first.
That's exactly right. So the first thing you want to do is not just jump in the water. You want to stand there and look and see if you can see some rising fish. And I've learned over the years that you've got to train yourself to be able to find them, but try to see if there's rising fish. If you plan to dry fly fish, if you're going to nymph, then you can jump in the water. But many times we find we'll catch fish between 1 and 2 rod lengths off of the shore. And so if you jump into the water, you're immediately moving fish out. So I'm trying to see if there's rising fish, see if I can find the insect floating down the river. If there is, and I see a fish eat that fly, then I'll just kind of watch it and see if it's going to rise again. Sometimes I will, sometimes they won't, which drives me crazy. I don't understand why. And then tie on a fly and fish it. And my leader system is simple. I take a 9-foot 5X leader, and the tippet on a 5X leader is about 20 or 22 inches, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I cut off about a foot, and then I take 6X leader tippet and tie on about 3 feet with a triple surgeon. And I do that because I believe that 6X tippet makes a tremendous amount of difference. You'll trick more fish with a 6X tippet on this river than a 5X.
Okay. Great tip. You going fluoro or regular?
Regular. And then secondly, many times I have been fishing, changing flies, you cut it off, you tie in another fly, you cut it off, and pretty soon you're out of tippet. And having that 3-foot section and that triple surgeon knot, when I get within about, I like to say 18 inches, but it will go down to 12 inches because I'm too lazy or there's fish right
Yeah, I'm with you.
But you always know that you're fishing with 6X tippet. And so you just cut that knot, pull out another 3 feet, tie that on. It doesn't take too long. And that's the best tip I could give you.
No kidding.
And you can use that technique anywhere in the world, and use in Montana, we'll fish, let's say 4X as terminal. And so I'll take a 9-foot 3X tippet, cut that off, use 4X.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm always fishing with it. Just a really simple technique. I happen to use Rio, but you can use whatever manufacturer you want. I think that it's best not to mix manufacturers. And that's just a simple way.
I like
And the
that.
other thing that it will allow you then is you've got at least 3 feet of tippet that, remember we talked earlier about a drag-free drift, and
Right.
having that 6X tippet, a long 6X tippet will help with that drag-free drift. So that's a strategy that I think about.
Right. What kind of cast are you using, John, to, maybe put some slack in your leader, or what are you doing there?
Yeah, for some of these I use kind of a parachute cast. So you throw it out and you just drop your rod, and that
Yeah.
allows you to have a little bit of slack on it. And many times I'll fish straight out and downstream a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And so you're trying to lay it out there, and then I'll start managing the line, the fly line with the tip of my rod, and just move it upstream a little bit and put out a little bit of line as it floats downstream. Other times, if you recall, I was saying that window is only a short, a 3-foot drag-free drift.
Yeah.
You just kind of throw it out there and throw it out there and throw it out there. So the other tip I've learned over the years is to measure your line, and by that, as you're casting out there, you finally got a spot where your line is, or your fly is now far enough out. And I'm a right-hand caster, so in my left hand, I pinch that, and then
Right.
I'll pull the line in and I'll cast it. And as I shoot line, I have my line still pinched, so it will only go as far as what I want it to be. And so that's how I measure my cast, and that helps with my accuracy of being able to cast to a spot, which I think is super important.
Yeah. That's a technique I think is used in a lot of places. Like up, if you go fish, some of the rivers in Michigan that are just full of logs and wood, and you got to bounce that fly an inch or two from the edge of that wood. You've
Yeah,
got to measure your cast, or you're going to be hung up all day long. And it really works, what you describe.
yeah. And I think if you don't, you're going to hook up, and then you'll contact me and buy some flies, and I'm okay with that.
That's okay too. Right. So you're primarily a dry fly fisherman, and I'm curious if you could talk about why. I think I might know why you just fish dries, but maybe you could talk about that. But also, then, what other tips do you have for dry fly fishermen?
Yeah, I really enjoy seeing a fish take my fly. And as
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, I am fortunate to fish a lot. And so I can do that. I totally understand people who aren't able. I'll fish, I don't know, 130, 150 days a year. And
Oh wow,
for some
fun.
people, 12 days is a lot of fishing. And so by having time on the river, I'm able to sit back and enjoy it and not focus on how many fish I'm going to catch. So it's the challenge of it. And that's what I enjoy on dry fly fishing.
Very good. Well, if you were to give the listeners kind of a list of your top flies for the Metolius, could you rattle a few patterns off for us?
You bet. So I already mentioned the sparkle dun
Yep.
in a variety of sizes and colors. My Riverkeeper soft tackle cripple, and you can go to my website and see what that looks like. And I tie those 22 through size 8. Iris caddis is a great fly in tan or amber, size 14s and 16s. A purple haze. I have
Yeah.
no idea why a purple haze works, but it does. We call it the purple haze hatch, but there is no insect called a purple haze. It's just a parachute atom that has a purple body instead of a gray body.
Yeah.
My theory is that it's maybe a spinner. But just segue quickly. One of the other posts that I'll talk about are the life of an insect, and the nymph and the emerger and the dun and the spinner. So having flies to imitate those stages is important, which brings me to a rusty spinner in size 16 and 18 works well. A Clark's Golden Stone. My friend Lee Clark developed a Golden Stone fly pattern that's very simple, but just he was an artist and using a combination of materials that really makes it look like a live fly. And he came up with a pattern called the Lady Stone a few years ago. And just by adding a tail of a golden pheasant, there's some black barring at the very end of that, and tying it in such a way it looks like the egg sac of a golden stone.
Yeah.
And fish will key on females sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
There's a prolific golden stone hatch in the upper river in July.
Okay.
Another one would be the beetle Bailey, which is my variation of Andy Grillo's hippie stomper.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And some ants. Those are dry flies. For nymph fishermen, I would use my golden stone as a variant that I tie of a Davy McPhail golden stone. You can see that on my website. I've come up with one called my Riverkeeper Stonefly Nymph. So those are for salmon flies. A pheasant tail perdigon that I used 2 days ago and did really well with it.
Huh.
$3 dip, size 16 or 18. Rainbow Warrior, an olive perdigon, a lightning bug, a Haigh SOS. Those are all flies I use. For the green drake, about a size 10 or 12 Mercer's poxyback green drake nymph. It looks super buggy, and I tie those and fish them occasionally. Bull trout will take those too.
Yeah. What's your favorite streamer pattern for a bull trout?
The Dalai Lama.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned that. Okay.
Yeah, so Dalai Lama, and that's an olive and white. And I've also used just a simple string leech in black or black and purple. Purple's always a good color, whether it's a dry fly or a nymph.
Well, that's a great list.
So those are something. And as you talked earlier, there's just a prolific amount of insects on the river, and so I would come, if you're going to be here, contact the Fly Fisher's Place or the Camp Sherman store. They've got a full service fly shop in there as well. But the Fly Fisher's Place in Sisters, Oregon here, Jeff has a great weekly fishing report, and he talks about what flies are effective. And
I gotcha. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, with these road trips you're taking, sometimes you're gone for 45 days with your wife doing these road trips, and you've been married for a long time. I'm kind of curious, do you have any tips for how to have a long-lasting marriage like you have?
Yeah, let her buy her own fly fishing stuff.
Let her buy her own. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, women love to go shopping, right?
Yeah. Okay. So did you make a mistake and bought her a fly rod once, or what happened?
Well, I said, well, here's a fly rod. You can borrow one of mine, and that's the worst thing in the world.
I gotcha.
So usually it's the worst of the two, right?
Yeah, right.
And both of us, we should talk about gear real quick. So
yeah, please.
What's important is that she has the rod that fits her, and she's comfortable using. And we both happen to use a Winston B2X. It's an older rod. And we fish 5 weights, but a 4 and a 5 weight, either of those would work on the river. I've taken 3 weights out and fish occasionally in some smaller water. For bull trout, 7 and 8 weight, probably preferred would be an 8 weight.
Okay, very good.
And a floating, weight forward floating line for the dry flies would be effective. And then our 9-foot 5X cutoff, add the 6X, so you're fishing a 11-foot leader most of the time.
Okay, right. That's great. Let me ask you this, just in a minute or two we've got left here. Do you have out of all your fishing exploits, do you have a favorite moment you could share with us?
There's one spot on the river we call Head in the Water Hole. And my wife and I had fished it before. We hadn't really named it. We had said, there's a spot up above X campground. Let's go up there and see what's going on. So we did. And we walk up, and here's two kids, high school age kids, and they're laying on the ground. And we go, what in the world? We don't see a fly rod around. It just seems really odd. And we get close to them, and we start talking with them. Hey, how you doing? What's up? Oh, we're just watching the fish. So they lived in Redmond and drove over and got their snorkel mask and just stuck their head in the water so they could watch fish.
Okay. If I was a fly fisherman, I could see doing that.
And they said, well, you can fish here if you want. And I said, okay. So there was a fish rising out there, and I hooked it, and the kid immediately sticks his head under the water so he could watch the fish fight underwater. So that's now known as head in the water hole.
That's great. Well, did he reveal any secrets to you that he found out by watching you?
He just had a great time and a really red face because it was cold water.
Oh, that's funny.
The other story I'll tell quickly is that on more than one occasion, I will hook and land a fish, and the fish has my fly in its mouth. And that's because I've hooked that fish and broke it off, and I've tied enough of my flies that I know it was my fly. And that's okay. I always marvel at that I can catch the fish the same way and then retrieve my fly and stick it back in my fly box.
That's a special fly right there.
It is. It worked.
Lived to catch. Right. It worked. It lived to catch another fish, hopefully.
It worked.
One last question, John. Do you have any favorite restaurants, watering holes for hungry, thirsty anglers at the end of the day in this area?
You bet. My tip would be, if you're going to fish on the river, get a sandwich at the Camp Sherman store for lunch. They have terrific sandwiches.
Okay.
They've got a deli there. You can stop in and see what's written on the whiteboard in the back for effective flies that are going on. In Sisters, Oregon here, we have a new place called The Barn. It's got some food carts and microbrews. Microbrews are big in Oregon, Central Oregon. There's so many breweries here. So that's new. The EM is just relatively new as well. It's a popular place in town. If you just want a burger, fries, and a shake, No Cap Drive-In is a place to go. Three Creeks Brewery at Five Pine. And then lastly, one of the favorite bakeries here in town is Angeline's Bakery. It's a local place that you can get a turkey bagel sandwich or quiche, or they've got a variety of good baked goods there as well.
Good selection of places. There you go, folks. So once again, the name of the site is what? And how do people get in touch with you, John?
Riverkeeper Flies, and there's a contact button there, or you can send me an email at riverkeeperflies@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. John, thank you so much for being on the show. It's great having you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Steve.
Hey, listen, I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow. And thank you, folks, for listening. We'll be sure to post John's pictures. And he sent me a whole bunch of great pictures of the Metolius River and some of these tight shots he's got of the flies and the fish that he's catching. So we'll put all those out there on our Facebook and Instagram pages. You can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please tag a buddy, let them know. As always, our music is by Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.